This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, ideas, and interviews from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Head to mediasalesmastery.com to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, selling media while working remotely. So why this one? Well, right now it's pretty obvious. I think as media salespeople, our entire profession has kind of been predicated on this idea that face-to-face interaction drives our business. Getting the meeting, getting face-to-face, building rapport, understanding the client's objectives and the environment they work in, presenting a persuasive argument, and being able to really kind of read those non-verbal cues. These are all historically done face-to-face. In my experience, I think unless you're selling a stock standard offering, media is an enterprise sale. It requires a knowledge of the client and their objectives. And for this reason, I think it rarely sells well over the phone. Now, obviously, things like email, other forms of electronic communication are starting to take a more active role through necessity. But I'm really interested to know, probably as we start to move through the next 6 months, what kind of model is going to work and where maybe the pendulum is swinging a little bit too far. We're getting a little too over-reliant on video conferencing versus where probably there's some old habits that we need to break as well around that old face-to-face trope. So what do we do, though, at the moment? Our livelihood pretty much depends on our ability to sell media without having ourselves or our prospects ever be in the same room together. Well, it's exactly what we're going to get into today. Our guest, Emilie Davis of LinkedIn. Emilie actually reached out to me during the initial phase of COVID, and she took me through their Sales Navigator program. I'd highly recommend checking that out for anyone who sells media, by the way. What was interesting, though, is that Emilie obviously lives in Sydney. I'm based in Brisbane. So we stepped through the entire process via a remote selling methodology. And funnily enough, Emilie actually said that even pre-COVID, a lot of her sales are actually conducted remotely using a combination of LinkedIn, email, phone, video conferencing, and content marketing. We're very lucky to have her today, so we're going to jump into the topic shortly. Remiss of me not to just do a call out quickly to Alex and Russ over at the podcast Killer Media Sales as well. These guys are actually the only other podcasters I know that specializes in media sales and helping enable people in this profession to do better. Very different format. These guys do a weekly episode every Friday, and they will typically go into any raft of topics that really kind of will help you just on that weekly basis to get a bit of a turbocharge in your week. So they've had the misfortune of having me on about 3 times now as a guest, so make sure you avoid those episodes, but make sure you give those guys a like, a subscribe, reach out to them. They are really, really good dudes and big supporters of this podcast as well.
The first 5.
Emilie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great that we could hook this up. It's funny, we've never actually met in person. We've met remotely during COVID lockdown. So before we sort of jump into the topic, tell us a bit about yourself. Where did you start in media? What do you do now?
Yeah, so actually I work within LinkedIn Sales Solutions, and I have basically clients that work within media across all industries. And so I just had a absolute desire to want to be, I guess, the best you possibly can when it comes to sales. And that's what led me towards working at an organization that essentially is quite meta in role. I sell a product that helps salespeople become more productive and successful to a sales audience across all sales industries. And that's really what landed me back in Sydney. So
a bit of a sales nerd by the sounds. It's good that we've got you on the podcast. It's interesting because when I was sort of, I guess, fielding some different kind of topic ideas from some different people who listen to the podcast, I think we're all struggling with, this new world of selling media remotely, which for a lot of us is not normal. I think when you and I spoke, I was really interested to hear how you actually run, I suppose, your sales process and your team, where a lot of what you do actually seems to be very reliant on the digital world and not so much on face-to-face selling. So I thought you'd be a great guest today to get in, for the main topic. But I'm also curious in terms of, I guess, your experience working in this sales discipline, if you will, with different media companies. Have you had any observations around just how people are actually adapting to this new world of selling remotely when previously it was probably predominantly done face-to-face?
Yeah, absolutely. I think many businesses have traditionally been face-to-face with their clients. And given the restrictions we've seen with COVID-19, obviously, they've had to quickly adapt how they engage and actually how they connect with whether it be existing clients and or prospects as well. I was recently reading a report. So McKinsey did a great survey recently. It was roughly, I think, 3,600 B2B buyers. And it essentially was asking them about how their business has changed, how their sales team are adapting. And they found that 96% of B2B companies shifted their go-to-market model during this period of COVID. But actually, what's more interesting, I think, is that 70% of respondents believe that the new model is just as effective or more so than before. And, as we acknowledged earlier on, I guess a lot of the times I'm asked, should we be doing face-to-face? Should we be doing digital? What's a better customer experience? What saves us more money? What's more cost-effective? And in my mind, it's really the wrong question to ask because it basically creates this false dichotomy. It's not either or. And I think that's probably one of the best things we've seen through this kind of forced adaptation that we're going through is that we can use both digital and face-to-face to really deliver better experiences for customers and or just engage with them where they want to be and how they want to be engaged.
I think that's a really good segue into today's main topic because we sort of need to break it into a few strands. One is like right now, clients actually can't, in many cases, see people face-to-face.
Yep.
In other instances, different states, we're starting to see a bit of a relaxing of the borders and people are starting to catch up. And then I guess the longer term thing, which I think you and I were reflecting on before this recording, was like, what new kind of dynamic are we actually going to be stepping into? Are we going back to the old? Are we going to just swing completely the other way where remote becomes the predominant way? Or is there going to be this third structure that gets created organically over the next 6 months? So I think it's really interesting to kind of look at this today around some stuff right now that's going to help people get an edge if they're struggling with this remote world, but also thinking about let's not rush back to the new normal. Let's think about what potentially best practice can look like in a new media world.
Yep.
Media sales mastery.
So I want to talk about, you quoted some great stats there before. Here's one I want to throw at you. 55% of communication is body language, right?
Yep.
What's been your approach to engaging with, interstate prospects and moving them through the sales cycle when you're doing it via virtual means where you might not have that two-way dialogue and that body language there as well?
So personally, I'm rarely working deals in which I don't have a geographically distributed buying circle. So we know in most B2B deals, there's now on average 9.2 buyers. And for me, I'm finding that a lot of them are never located in the same area. I was on a call just the other night and there were 10 to 12 execs dialed in from South Africa, Canada, UK, Singapore, Australia. I'm probably missing somewhere else. But my experience, it hasn't really changed that much because of that fact that I've personally been in more of the deals whereby we have a distributed buying circle or someone is not located in the same area. So we've always had to have that ability to have remote ways of engaging with them.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. And has that been your experience pre-COVID as well? That's
correct. So I think that's, for me, I've actually nearly seen a benefit. And this is why it's always interesting to understand what is that baseline people are coming from. Because normally for me, a discovery call might have been looking at, well, will I have a phone call with them or will I meet them face to face? That was that previous decision. Now what I've loved nearly through COVID is that we can bridge a bit of that gap between, will it be a phone call in which I can't read the body language, or will it be face-to-face in which I've got to go there, and obviously there's benefits to that as well. But I basically can get the best of both to some respect with video conferencing as well. Because, we've obviously seen over this period, I think Zoom the other day reported in their quarterly announcement, they've gone from like 10 million users a month back in December last year to 300 million.
Wow.
So what we're seeing is video conferencing has skyrocketed, as we know. Every kind of, I don't know really one buyer or seller right now who doesn't have access to video conferencing. So that's nearly unlocked this opportunity for us to, I guess, read a bit more of body language that we may not have had possible previously through just, traditional phone call. So that's actually been a bit of a benefit for me, is the fact that it's now everyone has video conferencing technology at their disposal.
It's interesting because the next thing I was curious about was certain clients and their capability with tech. COVID has obviously really accelerated a lot of the digital capability and the video conferencing. I call it the muscle memory with video conferencing with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Media sales teams definitely are equipped with all those resources. I think it's consistently the case, and certainly agencies are too. What about in the situation where, you've got clients that you are selling into that might not have that same level of tech savviness? Does the sales process actually have to adapt completely if you need to do a product demo or to take them through a proposal? I mean, have you encountered that where they just don't have video conferencing and you need to rely on other virtual or remote means to sell them?
Yes, I've encountered where they may not originally kind of have a video conference technology or software they're using, but now it's just so easy for anyone via their browser to be able to achieve that. So it's nearly a scenario where I'd have to encounter someone who doesn't have access to a computer, which I'm not really encountering, especially because I sell software as a service. So again, if someone's probably not that digitally savvy, I shouldn't be focusing on them. And I'll have bigger issues there. So I think because of that, that's possibly why I haven't encountered it as much with our sales cycle. But I do have clients who have fundamentally shifted how they go to market during this period. Like, for example, they have been selling a physical product. So they've had to rethink, okay, how do we ship this product or mail the product now to a prospective buyer? And then how do we help them set up a video conference so that, again, we can maybe understand, again, their product is physical. They want to see what's their reaction when they touch the product. What do they try and do with it intuitively? Like, how do they go through their normal demo, so to speak, virtually, as much as like making sure that person beforehand already has access to the product so they have a productive meeting. Like that's radically changed as a result of COVID, obviously, and the fact they couldn't travel there to do all of that in person.
It's funny, I didn't even consider a physical product sell because I was maybe trapped down the other angle of, enterprise sales, which is obviously what you do and what fundamentally media is too, which is very rarely is it a pre-built package or solution that you can just pick up and templatize and sell. It's often bespoke, it's solution-based, it's based on a deep knowledge of the client and their objectives, and it just takes time to actually step through a really robust pre-sales process. That to me was where I was really curious if that poses challenges with people who are used to doing that face-to-face in a physical environment with all the stakeholders in the room versus adapting that process virtually. Because the one challenge you have is always getting the meeting, but I'm curious about, are there demands on people's time because they're spending all day in video conferences? Is it harder to get access to their calendar for a video conference because there's a level of fatigue, are you finding?
Yeah, it's a good question because we've been talking a lot about people they want to zoom out, ironically. Like it's this idea of they're on back-to-back Zooms. So, sometimes they're a little over it. This is why I think I just go back to that first point that there is no one right answer with how to engage. It really depends on, again, who are you engaging with? What's their preferred method? Like sometimes I have some clients who want to go on a walk and talk. Like that's literally their break from maybe a Zoom, a back-to-back series, and we'll both go outside and use that as an opportunity to reconnect on kind of what we're talking through as our bi-weekly program management. So, I mean, it really depends, I think, ultimately on what's most effective. And that's going to also depend on who are you speaking with? Do you have 10 executives in the room? Because then, I mean, it's much better, obviously, to have a face-to-face opportunity to read the room. I still think it's quite difficult with large audiences to, read the room virtually. I find that quite challenging still via, for example, Zoom meetings or video conferencing.
Yeah, I hear that too. It's the one thing I'm finding that's really interesting on a lot of these Zoom meetings is if there's a presenter and there's like more than 4 or 5 people, there's often not that natural cadence or flow to the conversation because you've got five people sitting on mute. And there's these awkward moments of like, does that all make sense?
Yeah. Like thumbs up if you're all following.
yeah, exactly. And I'm just curious whether, there's any kind of techniques that you've used to, one, alleviate the awkwardness, and two, whether we're seeing that people are more forthcoming with feedback because of tech or less forthcoming and you have to draw it out. What's just broadly, are there any observations you have there around the actual quality of the conversation and maybe some techniques to actually draw that out into more of a dialogue that moves the sale through?
Yeah, look, I think there's some benefits of it on the one-on-one. And here's my thought. When you have one-on-one communications, where can video conferencing really help that maybe hasn't been possible before? And I think that is through the fact that many people are doing video conferencing at their home. Now, so what? I guess it's really that you get to start to know people in their home environment, and it just unlocks opportunities to chat with them much more personally. And the other day, I was just on a call and all of a sudden their new puppy just ran into the meeting, and we were talking about puppies for like a good 10 minutes. Long story. But that provided me with an opportunity to really get to know that person a lot better than I would if, they were sitting in an office conference room, for example. So I do think there's a quite unique opportunity we have right now whereby with video conferencing and people being at home, we're getting to know that person more personally. Like other times I'll see someone's got a guitar in the background and then all of a sudden I know they've just picked up guitar. Someone else has surfboard. So we'll start talking about that. It's just, again, being able to potentially observe people and speak with them in their home environment also helps us have a bit more of or build rapport on that respect. But in the one-to-many context, I think some of the ways to help with reading the room, just because it is naturally harder virtually, is to be able to bring in your manager or bring in a colleague, or as depending on your type of sale, you might have, for example, someone who's a technical specialist, but have someone else in the room who's actually helping you read that room. As you're speaking and trying to talk to everyone, they can also be observing the gallery of faces and what's going on. Otherwise, if you've got a champion in your sales cycle, a lot of times I'll speak with them after the call and they'll even say, yeah, look, I noticed this person wasn't as talkative, or this happened, we didn't hear anything from them.
That is actually a really interesting insight, Emilie. We did a podcast end of last year around negotiation, and they really spoke about, Liam, one of the guests, really spoke about the roles of different people in that negotiation, be it the lead negotiator, the summarizer, and I believe it was the observer. And when you think about it, the ability to actually assign, particularly if you are selling in an environment where there are multiple people from your organization on the same call, maybe you have a sales manager, a salesperson, and potentially a specialist like a digital specialist, the ability to actually have a game plan for how you're going to play that call and what everybody's role in that is increasingly important on tech, because you don't have those visual cues to give somebody a nod or a raised eyebrow to let them know it's their time to jump in and field a question. So that's a really good point. I can't say that I think we've mastered that skill yet too, but one of the other questions I kind of had for you, and probably a lot of this audience isn't Australian that listen to this podcast. We get a lot of people from frontier markets like the Middle East, South Africa, and certainly with a lot of them, central to media sales has always been this belief of the phone is the best method to establish a connection. Don't be afraid of the phone. It still drives our business. Face-to-face drives our business. I'm just curious whether that's some old school thinking, or whether there are still parts of that reign true. Does picking up the phone and prospecting just via a telephone call, a cold call, is that still got a place as we move into the next few years of media sales, potentially working in a more remote environment?
Yeah, look, I think this idea of calling people, it fits into a multi-channel strategy. That's what I think is ultimately driving the best success. It's not one or the other yet again. It's okay if I send them a LinkedIn message and then I send them an email and then I call them and then I go back to an email. We know, and I think it was actually one of your podcast guest the other week was talking about, on average, it takes about 7 times before a prospect might respond across, multitude of surveys. And so we know that it takes quite a few touch points before they're going to respond. And I think that being able to use the phone is one of those touch points. But the flip side of that is, you've got surveys from Harvard Business Review saying that 90% of C-level won't respond to a cold outreach. I just had 2 calls earlier that were from numbers I didn't know, and obviously I just let them go through to, voicemail. If I know someone, I'll call them back. If I don't, I won't call them back. If it's not of interest, I won't call them back. So I do think we're seeing that cold calling has become less effective. There's better means of being able to cut through the noise and to show in a more personal way, hey, look, here's essentially why I'm reaching out and the potential area of value I could bring or spark curiosity with that person. And we can do that through digital means. Yeah,
and this is sort of now starting to really move into your area of expertise with LinkedIn and particularly the Sales Navigator proposition. And I want to sort of get your really unfiltered opinion on the fact that if that is the way that things are moving, where people are starting to see that there's that omnichannel approach and that LinkedIn is a really powerful tool, obviously for being able to build credibility, understand influences, relationships, like navigate through a lot of the kind of minutiae that cold calling used to have to cut through. How do people differentiate themselves from other media sales professionals that are currently doing the same thing? How do you stand out in that new digital world?
Here's one thing, and maybe this is a bit of a contrarian view, but I think the way media sales people differentiate themselves hasn't necessarily changed. The principles are still the same. So if you think about the best media sales professionals, they take a keen interest in their customer, the industry, their customer's business, ways to digitally transform it, whatever it may be they're selling. They listen to them and they know everything about them. And really, if you think about it, that hasn't changed. Being a trusted advisor is still the thing we want to achieve with clients. It's just how we're able to listen, how we're able to understand our clients, where we're able to get the most insight and updates from them maybe is moving to a digital forum than what it was just previously being through the face-to-face and through having conversations. Now we can learn things digitally or, on sites like LinkedIn that I never would have surfaced, for example, during a face-to-face conversation. And I think that's why, the best professionals are leveraging the two. It's not only what you can glean from face-to-face and building that rapport in a face-to-face environment and having those conversations, but you can gain a lot of insight about people, their proudest career achievements, what people are posting on LinkedIn about how they're working from home, what their family's doing, all of these things that really help you connect with them still.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I do actually agree with that sentiment. We were having a conversation, it was a couple of years ago now, with a couple of the investment teams at one of the key agencies in the market I work in. And one of the things that I said, which consistently comes up, is this whole piece around knowledge and understanding of your client's business is ranked as the absolute number one priority for a media sales team. If you're coming in and you're putting a proposition forward, understand the market, the channel, understand the industry that you are working in, understand the client, because that is actually the first thing. And I do often think that we maybe are too reliant on the client teams and the managers, and we don't do enough of our own independent research on clients, on categories, on industries to get an understanding of the conventions and what actually drives that client's entire category. So you can attack that sales process from a much more informed, broader view and broader commercial perspective. So that's a really good insight there. It seems to me like you actually do a lot of the content sharing as part of your sales touchpoints too. I know when we've been engaging, talking about Sales Navigator, you're often one to always send a link or a little tidbit to me,
a little PS.
To follow up, just an email. Can you talk a bit about that process and why you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to be honest, it just comes back to this idea. It's like Dale Carnegie when he said, with How to Win Friends and Influence People, that's a book that's stood the test of time with salespeople. And he says, to be interesting, be interested. And so I love this idea of, even once you've, finished off your conversation, you can add this little tidbit saying, P.S., thought you might find this interesting because I saw previously that you had just posted about how advertisers should be increasing their spend to be able to come out of this stronger than before. So it's just like by adding that soft touch of like, hey, I've taken interest in learning a bit more about you, thought you might find this of value. It's how we kind of drive our own credibility. And that's, I think, also, it was actually one of my previous managers always said it's nice to be able to throw in the PS, which is just a way of like making sure that every single message should be driving value. My rule of thumb is every time I go to send an email, for example, I always think about what's the value this person gains from it. If it's rubbish, then it's a waste of my time sending it and it's a waste of their time reading it. So we want to cut that out.
It was a good point, though, because, I think it was Andrea Ingham that you're referencing when she said, I think it was 5 to 7 follow-ups to convert a sale through an opportunity. And where I think a lot of salespeople get intimidated about that is they go, oh, I'm being a pest. I don't want to nag them. I'm being a pest. But if you can pepper that follow-up with something a little bit more relevant, like, hey, here's something that I've seen. Here's something I think is relevant. I'm sharing that with you. So that it's a nice warm entry to a conversation to then kind of go, so where are we at? Particularly when you're moving a deal through that's actually a long sales cycle. I know even in a really short transactional market like the one that my team operate in, we still got a sales cycle from the issuing of a brief to the actual campaign being live. It's still about 12 weeks. So that's a long process on average. Sometimes at the moment, it's like at 24 hours is a luxury, but it's important to kind of think about this and go, if we are going from that omnichannel approach, picking up the phone, sending an email, even looking at some different touch points. If someone is active on LinkedIn, I'm very inclined to engage with their content. I think it's just an absolute easy win that can be had as long as it's authentic and you are actually adding value and not just being sycophantic and saying I love everything you do on the post. It can be a really good way to build your profile very quickly. I'm going to kind of draw this to a close before we jump into the next topic on something more tactical, Emilie, and I'm curious to get your perspective. So a lot of direct media salespeople, they're really used to running their week as a split of internal and external, right? So, I'm in the office Monday, maybe a bit of Tuesday for my forecast, my whip, my sales meeting to get my admin banged out, bit of training, and then I want to be in the field in front of clients for the back end of the week. Or, in the agency market, I know a lot of the guys like to start their morning out with clients and then they come in the office to kind of close off items for the day. Where people are conditioned to kind of this internal-external split of focus, and it's really easy to quarantine your time and triage your calendar. Curious to know if there's any tips you might share for people who are now working exclusively from home, how they still manage and protect those two core pillars of the sales process.
Yeah, and look, I think the biggest thing there is you need to block out time for the core activities. So first step, you already have the awareness that both those activities are core. And so you need to go ahead and actually block that time, schedule time throughout your week for those activities. Because otherwise what often happens is we do what's ever easiest. But easy choices, can mean a hard life and doesn't always mean we're spending our times in the best area. So I think it's really about blocking time for the important activities. I came across, do you know the Eisenhower matrix, or it's sometimes called like the urgent important matrix?
Yes. It's like the 4 quadrants on a to-do list of where they sit. Yep.
Yeah, so basically I use that as a good way to help me go through and decide, okay, is this task urgent and important? In which case I've got to do that now. If it's neither of those, just delete it. It's not worth focusing on. And then there's obviously if it's urgent but not important, then you might schedule it. But that just helps you understand, okay, what do I need to be focused on right now? Where should I be spending my time? And then block that out on your calendar. At the end of the day, we're all creatures of habit, so we'll fall to whatever's easiest. But again, what's easiest isn't always what's right. I mean, it's the same thing, people always talk about, okay, I need to be managing my existing clients and prospecting. By our very nature, it's so much easier to just manage our existing clients, or that's naturally what we want to do because it's harder to probably go out and find new business, typically speaking. But we need to schedule time for both because both are critical activities.
Yeah, and I think, you touched on something really, really valuable there around, the urgent and the important, or the easy or the right thing. And, somebody, I can't remember who it was, but the expression went something like, every day is basically just a series of conflicts between the right thing and the easy thing. And so much of what we have to do in media sales a lot of the time is bring a level of consistency to a very inconsistent market, because the market is ever changing around us. Our revenues are ever changing around us. We're arguably in a situation right now where things are changing day by day. And if I was to reflect on the last 3 months and see the people who are actually working through and coping, it's the people who've anchored their weeks to a really good ideal week framework, and they're disciplined and structured with how they actually do those key activities. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. Clearly something you seem to have mastered as well, because you're quite active on the new business development, but it sounds to me like you're also, unlike quite a few companies at the moment, you're also quite active in terms of your clientele, probably more than ever before, are really starting to ramp up some of the stuff they're doing on LinkedIn and in this new digital world too. Yeah,
absolutely. I know one thing for us is we're seeing businesses go through major transformation in their sales process. So it is by virtue of COVID-19 and this fact that, face-to-face isn't possible. And that's how some of our customers were previously doing, 90% of kind of their engagement. It's been a radical change for them, as you can imagine. So it's on that side, you're right, in terms of it's a bit more legwork to go through that transformation journey at an accelerated pace together.
Well, look, I think we're going to jump into the next topic now.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
And the reason why I think this one is a really interesting one is you already spoke about it and we've covered it off, but it came through to me and it was just the right kind of question for this topic, because I've actually got a guy in my team who's probably in a similar scenario. So I'm going to read you the question, and then I thought it'd be good for us to just problem solve it and see if we can give some advice.
Love it.
So the question is, I work in agency sales and recently started a new job working on a new portfolio. Booking client discoveries, taking briefs, and presenting proposals over video conference is fine, because that's what everyone's doing. But what I really find is lacking is the ability to have more informed relationship-building catch-ups, a coffee, a light lunch, an after-work drink, something more fun that's designed to help build rapport. And, they were central to my previous success as a media salesperson. With a lot of agencies saying they're going to be working remotely for some time to come, what advice would you have for me to help me build my relationships on a more personal level whilst working remote? Now, I'm just going to caveat this one, Emilie, by saying that it came through about 6 weeks ago, where we were right in the depths of absolute lockdown. Do not even leave the house for anything other than light exercise or to do your shopping. So as society opens back up, as things relax, maybe there's a bit of a different approach here. But it probably does strike me as something we should talk about if we actually do see people start to have the ability to work from home longer term. People in Sydney I know who live on the Central Coast, that's difficult for them if they were commuting into the city and they're now not as much. What, just initially kind of reflecting on that, would be your assessment of that situation and maybe some advice for this person?
Yeah, look, I think like anything, when our environment changes, we have to adapt. So, in this case, they've obviously started with a pretty new portfolio. And so it is a bit more challenging. It's kind of like the same for if you've known colleagues who have onboarded at a new company during this period, they've said it is more challenging because they just don't have the depth of relationship with their colleagues that others were lucky enough to have before, kind of being in a more disconnected environment. So I think that's quite unique here. But, ultimately, I think there's still this opportunity to get to know people personally via virtual or digital. So I think where I come at it much more from is I've had great experiences of just being able to connect with people through digital channels. Again, this idea of, I think it was when we first connected, it was like 2 days after we caught up via VC, and I saw that it was your birthday on LinkedIn, and I just shot you a quick text. But this idea that it doesn't have to, again, be, all one thing or another. So personally, I think it's great to have these after work drinks. I've had catch ups with people, like I said, which have just been walk and talk, like coffee meetings. It's not the exact same, but it's still been nice to just get to know them. You talk about stuff outside of work. It's still possible in a virtual sense, but I'll admit, I don't think anything replaces, the ability to have that same level of rapport face to face. I think what has changed is just evaluating if that's always the best means of engaging. Because again, we go back to that McKinsey study I said, and many buyers are saying, Bain & Co. ran a study recently, and they found similarly 80% of buyers prefer virtual engagement. So if our buyers are preferring that in complex, sales cycles, then we have to adapt to some respect. We can't just do the old ways of operating. Otherwise, we won't be successful in the modern context.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly my sort of assessment of this too. But one of the things that I think, particularly so much of my career being leading agency sales teams, would also be what I think this person's missing isn't the face-to-face or the relationship building that happens in a one-on-one sense. What I think they're left wanting for, and it's a key insight that I think we've had over the last 8 weeks, it's those hallway conversations that happen as a consequence of moving around the market.
Right.
So, on a given week where you might run into, and I'm reading massively between the lines here, so I'm making massive assumptions, but in a given week where you might do 8 face-to-face meetings with an agenda, with an outcome, be it a discovery or a presentation or a relationship build or a contract call, walking into an agency, walking around a marketplace, you might run into more people and have the ability to have a brief interaction that gives you a really nice kind of touch point and just allows you to go, hey, we should grab lunch next week, or hey, good to see you. That's interesting. How's things with you? That one's a hard one to replicate, I think. And I hope that as society opens up, people are going to move to a model where they're just more comfortable having maybe more socially led catch-ups with people. Going to a restaurant and just having a few drinks on a Friday afternoon with a couple of key people, like that kind of inconsequential social interaction stuff. But to your point, I think you've got to look at what your clients are wanting for, and if they're feeling like you're delivering value, you're engaging them great via the methods of communication that they prefer, we've got to ask if there's really a problem to be solved here.
Yeah, and it might even just mean, for example, if you do your homework beforehand and already know who you'd love to have run into in the hallways, so to speak, if you just ask, your contact next time, hey, look, here's why I think it'd be worthwhile, me sharing some of these insights we've just gone through with person X, then what you're doing is kind of facilitating that anyway. It's just not the same way it was done before, whereby you could run into them in the hallway, like you said, or through, a workplace chat. So it's kind of changed, I think, how we've already got to come to the table knowing who we want to run into, so to speak. So it still appears a bit serendipitous that we've run into someone or we've had that conversation, and just, again, start to do more of them if we can, wherever possible, through asking for that introduction from the person we're working with.
Well, it seems to be working well for you in terms of what you're currently doing. So, look, we'll sort of wrap this one up. In terms of looking at, I guess, where we're at, I think we could talk about this for a long time, and it's safe to say that the situation is ever changing. So, for all we know, we could catch back up in 2 months, Emilie, and have this chat, and it could be a completely different set of scenarios. But I think for people that are adapting to this new remote working environment, I'd be really curious to hear from you, if there's any parting thought or single piece of wisdom you might share with people based on your experience of being able to do it, so competently through this difficult time, and probably pre-COVID, being able to do it well where you were selling with, interstate or international clientele.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we've seen is that for people to embrace remote selling, they have to be equipped with the right tools. And so one of the first things sales leaders are looking at is, how do I empower my team to be successful in the remote context, if that's something we are going to see be a bit more long term. And so I think in terms of parting thoughts, it's like, do I have the right tools to succeed? So for me, we spoke about this a little earlier, having access to video conference tools. For me, I'm lucky. Again, I sell a product that I can use that helps me essentially navigate who I need to be speaking to, what's the best path of entry for me to speak to that person, and, how do I understand more about them so that when I engage in a way that's personalized and cuts through the noise of other people who are just reaching out and it might seem like spam. So that's the thing. I think ultimately what we're trying to help with is ensuring that people have the right tools to succeed in this modern selling environment.
It's only early days in terms of my understanding of the Sales Navigator product and sort of what LinkedIn offers, being a big advocate of LinkedIn. And really, LinkedIn is the only platform I promote this podcast on, because I know that's exactly where the audience are going to sit, and it's the right context. If I start spamming people on my Insta stories, I don't think they'll be too appreciative of such a niche podcast. But, I'd encourage anybody in the audience, and if you're comfortable, Emilie, I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Reach out to Emilie, just get an understanding of not only the Sales Navigator proposition, but how Emilie actually is running her business at the moment, because it is almost purpose-built for COVID. It's almost serendipitous that this thing hit, because you almost had this playbook in place before and it was clearly working. I think, if anything, COVID has just accelerated everyone else's digital capability to a point where we're now seeing that model works. So, if anyone wants to reach out to you, Emilie, I'm sure that's, that will happen, and they're okay to do that just via LinkedIn. Is that the best method?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be good. I'd be hard pressed to find another platform that I'd recommend connecting with me on.
Yes, I'm sure the employer wouldn't appreciate that either. Well, look, thanks so much for your time. It's been awesome to talk to you, and I will be sure to sort of keep you as a bit of a stable of guests that we kind of continue to draw on as the podcast kind of gets into the next few seasons, because I think there's a lot of other stuff we could have gotten into today. But, thank you for your time today. Thank you for some great insights on this particular topic. And hopefully to the audience, this adds a lot of value to you guys and helps you navigate the next 3 to 6 months.
Phenomenal pun. Thanks for finishing on that. And thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I've absolutely loved it. Thanks, Jamie.
You've been listening to Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. Head to mediasalesmastery.com to help pick the topic, guide the show, and don't forget to subscribe to receive new episodes each week.